A starving German shepherd showed up at a fire station. What the firefighters did next was unbelievable. In the sleepy town of Millfield, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, a small fire station stood as a beacon of safety and security. The firefighters who called this station home were a tight-knit group, bonded by their commitment to protecting the community they served. Their days were filled with drills, maintenance tasks, and the occasional call to action when an emergency arose. It was on one such unremarkable day that a starving German shepherd limped into the fire station premises. The dog's ribs were visible beneath her matted fur, and her eyes were filled with fear and exhaustion. The firefighters, who were in the middle of their morning routine, immediately took notice of the distressed animal. Captain John Thompson, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a kind face, was the first to approach the dog. He crouched down, speaking softly to her as he extended his hand. "Hey there, girl. It's okay. We're not going to hurt you." The dog, wary and skittish, took a tentative step forward, sniffing John's hand before allowing him to gently stroke her head. As he did so, he noticed the scars that marred her skin, hidden beneath the unkempt fur. His heart sank as he realized that this poor creature had likely endured a life of abuse and neglect. John turned to his team, his eyes filled with determination. "We need to help her. She's been through hell, and it's our duty to show her that there's still goodness in this world." The firefighters nodded in agreement, their faces etched with concern and compassion. They knew that taking in a stray dog was not part of their usual responsibilities, but they also knew that they could not turn their backs on a creature in need. And so, with gentle coaxing and patience, they managed to guide the German shepherd into the station. They provided her with water and a small meal, watching as she devoured the food with a desperation that spoke volumes about her past. As the dog settled in, the firefighters began to discuss what they should do next. They knew that they couldn't keep her at the station indefinitely, but they also couldn't bear the thought of sending her back out into the world, where she would likely face more hardship and cruelty. It was then that John made a decision. "We'll take care of her until we can find her a proper home. In the meantime, let's give her a name. Something that represents the strength and resilience she's shown by making it this far." The firefighters mulled over various names, but it was rookie firefighter Emma Chen who suggested the perfect one. "How about Ember? Like the glowing remnants of a fire, still burning bright despite the odds." Everyone agreed that it was a fitting name for the brave dog who had found her way to their doorstep. And so, Ember became a temporary resident of the Millfield fire station, unaware that her presence would soon spark a chain of events that would change the lives of everyone in the small town. As the days passed, Ember slowly began to adjust to her new surroundings. The firefighters took turns caring for her, providing her with regular meals, clean water, and a warm place to sleep. They even set up a makeshift bed for her in the corner of the common room, using an old blanket and a few pillows. Ember's physical condition started to improve, thanks to the love and attention she received from her new caretakers. Her ribs became less prominent, and her coat began to regain its luster. However, the emotional scars of her past remained, manifesting in the way she flinched at sudden movements and shied away from loud noises. The firefighters, determined to help Ember heal both physically and emotionally, spent their free time with her, offering gentle words of encouragement and soothing touches. They took her on short walks around the station, allowing her to bask in the sunlight and breathe in the fresh air. Emma, who had suggested Ember's name, formed a particularly strong bond with the dog. She would often sit with Ember during her breaks, reading aloud from her favorite books or simply talking to her about her day. Ember seemed to find comfort in Emma's presence, resting her head on the young woman's lap as she listened to the soothing sound of her voice. As Ember's trust in the firefighters grew, they began to notice more signs of her troubled past. The scars on her body, which they had initially attributed to general neglect, seemed to tell a more sinister story. Some of the marks appeared to be deliberate, as if someone had intentionally harmed her. Captain John Thompson, troubled by this revelation, decided to take Ember to the local veterinarian for a thorough examination. The vet, Dr. Sarah Novak, confirmed their suspicions. "These scars are consistent with injuries sustained in dogfighting," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow and anger. "It's clear that Ember was used as a bait dog, likely for years." The news hit the firefighters hard. They had known that Ember had suffered, but the reality of her past was even more horrific than they had imagined. The thought of someone subjecting an innocent creature to such cruelty filled them with a sense of outrage and a renewed determination to protect her. John thanked Dr. Novak for her help and returned to the station with Ember, his mind reeling with the new information. He gathered his team and shared what he had learned, watching as their faces reflected the same anger and disgust that he felt. "We can't let this go unchallenged," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "Ember is proof that there's something sinister going on in our town, and it's our duty to uncover the truth and bring those responsible to justice." The firefighters nodded in agreement, their eyes blazing with a shared sense of purpose. They knew that taking on this fight would not be easy, but they also knew that they could not stand idly by while innocent animals suffered. And so, with Ember as their inspiration and their guiding light, the firefighters of Millfield Fire Station embarked on a mission to expose the dark underbelly of their town and bring hope to those who had been forgotten and abused. As the firefighters delved deeper into the mystery surrounding Ember's past, rumors began to circulate in the small town of Millfield. Whispers of a notorious dogfighting ring, operated by a shadowy figure known only as the Breeder, spread like wildfire among the residents. According to the rumors, the Breeder was a cruel and calculating man who had been running the illegal operation for years, evading justice and preying on the most vulnerable creatures in society. He was said to be a master manipulator, using fear and intimidation to keep his associates in line and his victims silent. The firefighters, determined to uncover the truth, began to conduct their own investigation. They reached out to local animal rescue organizations and shelters, hoping to gather more information about the extent of the problem in their community. What they discovered was even more disturbing than they had imagined. The Breeder's operation was not only responsible for the abuse and exploitation of countless dogs, but it also had ties to other criminal activities, including drug trafficking and illegal gambling. As they dug deeper, the firefighters realized that taking down the Breeder would not be a simple task. He was well-connected and had managed to evade law enforcement for years. However, they also knew that they had something that the Breeder did not: Ember. The rescued German Shepherd, with her scars and her indomitable spirit, was living proof of the cruelty that the Breeder and his associates inflicted upon innocent creatures. She was a symbol of hope and resilience, and the firefighters knew that her story had the power to inspire change. They began to share Ember's story with the community, using social media and local news outlets to spread awareness about the issue of dogfighting and animal abuse. They organized fundraisers and events to support local animal rescue efforts, and they worked tirelessly to gather evidence against the Breeder and his operation. As word of their efforts spread, more and more people began to come forward with information and support. Many had been too afraid to speak out against the Breeder before, but the courage and determination of the firefighters gave them the strength to stand up for what was right. Meanwhile, Ember continued to thrive under the care of her new family at the fire station. Her physical wounds had healed, and she was beginning to show signs of emotional recovery as well. She was no longer the cowering, frightened creature that had first arrived at the station, but a loyal and loving companion who brought joy and comfort to all who knew her. The firefighters knew that Ember's transformation was a testament to the power of love and compassion, and they drew strength from her resilience as they continued their fight against the darkness that had once consumed her. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they also knew that they had the support of their community and the unwavering determination to see justice served. With Ember by their side, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they were fighting not just for one dog, but for all the innocent creatures who had been victimized by the cruelty of others. As the firefighters' investigation into the dogfighting ring intensified, they found themselves facing unexpected obstacles and challenges. The Breeder, it seemed, was even more powerful and influential than they had initially believed, with connections that extended far beyond the small town of Millfield. Captain John Thompson, who had taken the lead on the investigation, began to receive anonymous threats, warning him to back off and let sleeping dogs lie. At first, he tried to brush off the threats as empty intimidation tactics, but as they grew more frequent and more specific, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. One evening, as John was leaving the fire station after a long shift, he found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of his car. The message was brief but chilling: "Stop digging, or you'll be the one who gets buried." John's first instinct was to keep the threat to himself, not wanting to worry his team or put them in danger. However, he knew that he couldn't face this battle alone, and he also knew that his firefighters were some of the bravest and most loyal people he had ever met. The next morning, John called a meeting with his team and shared the details of the threat he had received. The firefighters were understandably concerned, but they were also more determined than ever to see their mission through. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy," said Emma, her eyes blazing with determination. "But we also knew that we couldn't sit back and do nothing while innocent animals suffered. We're in this together, no matter what." The others nodded in agreement, their faces set with the same resolve that John felt in his own heart. They knew that they were up against a formidable enemy, but they also knew that they had the strength and the courage to fight for what was right. As they continued their investigation, the firefighters began to uncover more and more evidence of the breeder's cruelty and corruption. They discovered that he had been using his influence to silence witnesses and bribe officials, creating a web of deceit that extended far beyond the illegal dogfighting operation. Despite the dangers and the obstacles they faced, the firefighters refused to back down. They continued to gather evidence and build their case, knowing that every small victory brought them one step closer to bringing the breeder to justice. And through it all, Ember remained a constant source of inspiration and hope. Her resilience and her unwavering spirit reminded the firefighters of why they had taken on this fight in the first place, and her presence at the station brought a sense of joy and purpose to even the darkest of days. As the weeks turned into months, the firefighters' efforts began to pay off. More and more people came forward with information and support, and the evidence against the breeder and his associates grew stronger every day. The firefighters knew that they were on the cusp of something big, something that had the power to change their community and bring justice to those who had been wronged. And as they stood together, united in their shared sense of purpose and determination, they knew that they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they had the strength and the courage to see their mission through to the end. As the firefighters continued their tireless efforts to bring the breeder and his associates to justice, they found themselves facing a new challenge: the emotional toll of the work they were doing. Exposing the cruelty and corruption that had gone unchecked for so long was not an easy task, and it often left them feeling drained and disheartened. Emma, in particular, struggled with the weight of the investigation. As the one who had formed the closest bond with Ember, she felt a deep sense of responsibility to the dog and to all the other animals who had suffered at the hands of the breeder. She would often stay late at the station, poring over evidence and leads, desperate to find the missing piece that would bring the whole operation crashing down. One evening, as Emma sat hunched over her desk, Captain John Thompson found her there, exhausted and on the verge of tears. He sat down beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Emma," he said softly, "I know how much this means to you, and I know how hard you've been working. But you can't carry this burden alone. We're a team, remember? We're in this together." Emma looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But sometimes it feels like no matter how hard we try, we're never going to be able to make a real difference. The breeder is always one step ahead of us, and every time we think we're getting close, he slips away again." John nodded, understanding her frustration all too well. "I know it feels that way sometimes," he said. "But we can't give up. We owe it to Ember and to all the other animals who have suffered to see this through to the end. And we will. I promise you that." Emma managed a small smile, feeling a sense of renewed determination at John's words. She knew that he was right, and that giving up was not an option. They had come too far and fought too hard to turn back now. As the days turned into weeks, the firefighters continued to chip away at the breeder's operation, piece by piece. They worked tirelessly to build their case, gathering evidence and testimony from anyone who was willing to come forward. And as they did so, something remarkable began to happen. The community of Millfield, which had once been so divided and apathetic, began to come together in a way that no one had ever seen before. People from all walks of life, from the elderly widow who lived down the street to the teenage skateboarder who hung out in the park, began to rally behind the firefighters and their cause. They organized fundraisers and events to support the investigation, and they volunteered their time and resources to help in any way they could. They wrote letters to their elected officials, demanding action and accountability, and they took to social media to spread awareness about the issue of animal abuse and exploitation. And through it all, Ember remained a symbol of hope and resilience. Her story, which had once been one of pain and suffering, was now one of triumph and transformation. She had found a loving home with the firefighters, and she had become a beacon of light for a community that had been lost in darkness for far too long. As the firefighters looked around at the sea of faces that had gathered to support them, they knew that they were not alone in their fight. They had the strength and the courage of an entire town behind them, and they knew that together they could achieve anything. As the investigation into the breeders' dogfighting operation progressed, the firefighters found themselves uncovering more and more disturbing details about the extent of the cruelty and corruption that had taken place. They discovered that the breeder had not only been running the dogfighting ring, but had also been involved in a larger network of criminal activity that extended far beyond the borders of Millfield. Through their tireless efforts and the support of the community, the firefighters were able to gather enough evidence to bring their case to the authorities. They worked closely with local law enforcement and animal welfare organizations to build a strong case against the breeder and his associates, and they prepared to take their fight to the courts. But even as they made progress, the firefighters knew that their work was far from over. They knew that bringing the breeder to justice was only the first step in a much larger battle against animal abuse and exploitation, and they were determined to see it through to the end. One evening, as the firefighters gathered at the station to discuss their next steps, they were surprised to see a small group of people arriving at the door. As they watched, the group made their way inside, led by a woman with a determined expression on her face. "My name is Maria," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "And I'm here because I want to help." The firefighters listened intently as Maria told her story. She had been one of the breeder's victims, forced to surrender her beloved dog to the dogfighting ring when she was unable to pay a debt she owed to one of his associates. She had been living in fear ever since, afraid to come forward and speak out against the man who had taken everything from her. But when she heard about the firefighters' investigation and the progress they had made, she knew that she could no longer stay silent. She had come to the station to offer her testimony and her support, and to join the fight against the man who had caused so much pain and suffering. As Maria spoke, the firefighters felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. They knew that her story was just one of many, and that there were countless other victims out there who were still living in fear and silence. They promised Maria that they would do everything in their power to bring the breeder to justice and to provide support and resources to all those who had been affected by his cruelty. They also vowed to continue their work beyond the immediate case, to raise awareness about animal abuse and to advocate for stronger laws and protections for all creatures. In the weeks that followed, more and more people came forward to offer their own stories and their own support. Some were former victims, like Maria, while others were simply concerned citizens who wanted to make a difference in their community. Together, they formed a powerful coalition of advocates and activists, united in their shared goal of ending animal abuse and exploitation once and for all. They organized rallies and protests, they wrote letters and made phone calls to their elected officials, and they worked tirelessly to keep the issue at the forefront of the public consciousness. And through it all, Ember remained a constant presence and a powerful symbol of hope and resilience. She had come so far from the broken and beaten creature she had once been, and her transformation was a testament to the power of love and compassion to heal even the deepest wounds. As the firefighters looked around at the community they had helped to build, they knew that they had started something much bigger than themselves. They had sparked a movement that had the power to change lives and to make the world a better place for all creatures, one small act of kindness at a time. As the movement to end animal abuse and exploitation gained momentum, the firefighters found themselves at the center of a growing storm of media attention and public scrutiny. Reporters from local and national news outlets descended upon Millfield, eager to tell the story of the brave men and women who had taken on the breeder and his criminal empire. At first, the firefighters were uncomfortable with the attention. They had never sought the spotlight, and they worried that the focus on their personal stories would detract from the larger issue at hand. But as they saw the impact that their efforts were having on the community and beyond, they began to embrace their newfound role as advocates and leaders. They gave interviews and spoke at public events, sharing their experiences and their vision for a world where all creatures are treated with kindness and respect. They used their platform to raise awareness about the many forms of animal abuse that often go unnoticed and unchallenged, from neglect and abandonment to factory farming and wildlife trafficking. And as they did so, they began to see a shift in the public consciousness. More and more people were waking up to the reality of animal suffering and exploitation, and they were demanding change at every level of society. But even as the firefighters celebrated their successes, they knew that their work was far from over. The breeder's trial was fast approaching, and they knew that they would need to be at the top of their game to ensure that justice was served. They spent long hours preparing their testimony and gathering evidence, working closely with prosecutors and animal welfare experts to build an airtight case against the breeder and his associates. They also worked to provide support and resources to the many victims and witnesses who would be called upon to testify, knowing that the trial would be a traumatic and emotional experience for all involved. Through it all, the firefighters leaned on each other for strength and support. They had become more than just colleagues. They were a family, bound together by their shared commitment to justice and compassion. And at the center of that family was Ember, the brave and resilient German shepherd who had started it all. She had come so far from the broken and beaten creature she had once been, and her presence at the station was a constant reminder of the power of love and compassion to heal even the deepest wounds. As the trial approached, the firefighters knew that they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had the strength of their convictions and the support of their community behind them, and they knew that together, they could achieve anything. The day of the breeder's trial arrived, and the firefighters of Millfield found themselves at the center of a media circus unlike anything they had ever experienced. Reporters and cameras crowded the steps of the courthouse, eager to catch a glimpse of the brave men and women who had taken on one of the most notorious criminal enterprises in the country. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense and charged with emotion. The breeder sat at the defense table, flanked by a team of high-powered attorneys, his face a mask of arrogance and contempt. On the other side of the room, the firefighters and their allies sat in solidarity, united in their determination to see justice served. As the trial began, the prosecution presented a damning case against the breeder and his associates. They called witness after witness to the stand, each one painting a vivid picture of the cruelty and corruption that had gone unchecked for so long. There were the victims, like Maria, who had lost their beloved pets to the dogfighting ring and had lived in fear and silence for years. There were the former associates who had turned against the breeder, revealing the inner workings of his criminal empire and the brutal tactics he used to maintain his power. And there was Ember, the living symbol of the resilience and strength of all those who had suffered at the breeder's hands. When she was called to the stand, the courtroom fell silent, all eyes fixed on the brave and beautiful creature who had endured so much and yet still found the courage to trust and love again. As the firefighters watched the proceedings unfold, they felt a sense of pride and purpose that they had never known before. They had faced so many challenges and obstacles on the road to this moment, but they had never wavered in their commitment to justice and compassion. And when the verdict was finally read, the courtroom erupted in cheers and tears of joy. The breeder was found guilty on all counts, his empire crumbling to dust in the face of the overwhelming evidence against him. As the firefighters emerged from the courthouse, they were met with a sea of supporters, all eager to congratulate them on their hard-fought victory. But even in the midst of the celebration, they knew that their work was far from over. They had won a battle, but the war against animal abuse and exploitation was far from over. There were still so many creatures in need of their help and protection, and they knew that they could not rest until every last one was safe and free. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of triumph and gratitude. They had done something extraordinary, something that would be remembered for generations to come. They had shown the world that even the most entrenched and powerful forces of cruelty and corruption could be defeated by the power of love and compassion. And as they looked to the future, they knew that they would continue to fight for justice, one small act of kindness at a time. For they were the firefighters of Millfield, and they would never stop fighting for what was right. In the aftermath of the breeder's conviction, the firefighters of Millfield found themselves at the center of a new and unexpected challenge. With the dogfighting ring dismantled and its leaders behind bars, there were suddenly dozens of dogs in need of care and rehabilitation, many of them bearing the scars of their brutal past. The firefighters knew that they could not turn their backs on these innocent creatures, and so they set to work creating a makeshift shelter at the fire station, transforming empty rooms and unused spaces into cozy kennels and play areas. At first, it was a daunting task. Many of the dogs were fearful and aggressive, lashing out at anyone who came near them. But the firefighters refused to give up on them, pouring all of their love and patience into helping them heal and trust again. They worked around the clock, feeding and grooming the dogs, taking them for walks and playtime, and providing them with the medical care and attention they so desperately needed. And slowly but surely, the dogs began to respond to their kindness, their tails wagging and their eyes shining with newfound hope. As word of the firefighters' efforts spread throughout the community, volunteers began to pour in from all corners of Millfield, eager to lend a hand in any way they could. Some brought food and supplies, while others offered their time and expertise in training and rehabilitating the dogs. Among the volunteers was a young woman named Sarah, who had recently moved to Millfield in search of a fresh start. She had always had a deep love for animals, and when she heard about the firefighters' shelter, she knew that she had to be a part of it. Sarah quickly became one of the most dedicated volunteers at the shelter, spending every spare moment she had with the dogs. She had a special way with them, a gentle touch and a soothing voice that seemed to calm even the most frightened and traumatized among them. One day, as Sarah was working with a particularly challenging dog named Max, she had a breakthrough. Max had been one of the most heavily abused dogs in the dogfighting ring, and he had been resistant to all attempts at socialization and training. But as Sarah sat with him, speaking softly and offering him treats and gentle touches, something changed. Max's body language relaxed, and he began to lean into Sarah's touch, his tail wagging tentatively at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. From that moment on, Max became Sarah's special project. She worked with him every day, slowly building his trust and confidence until he was ready to be adopted into a loving forever home. And as the firefighters watched Sarah and Max's bond grow, they knew that they had found something special in her. She had a gift for healing, a way of connecting with even the most broken and traumatized creatures and helping them find their way back to wholeness. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah became an integral part of the shelter, working tirelessly alongside the firefighters to give every dog the love and care they deserved. And as they watched the dogs thrive and find their forever homes, they knew that they had created something truly extraordinary, a community of kindness and compassion that would endure long after the scars of the past had healed. As the firefighters and their volunteers continued their work at the shelter, they began to notice a troubling trend. While many of the dogs were thriving under their care, there were some who seemed to be struggling, their progress stalling or even regressing as time went on. At first, they chalked it up to the deep trauma that many of the dogs had endured, knowing that recovery was a long and difficult process. But as they dug deeper, they began to suspect that there was something more sinister at play. They started to hear whispers of a new dogfighting ring that had sprung up in the wake of the breeder's downfall, a shadowy organization that was even more brutal and ruthless than its predecessor. They heard stories of dogs being snatched from backyards and parks, of underground fights that left animals dead or maimed, and of a network of criminals that seemed to operate with impunity. The firefighters knew that they could not let this new threat go unchallenged, and so they sprang into action once again. They reached out to their contacts in law enforcement and animal welfare organizations, sharing what they had learned and gathering intelligence on the new ring. At the same time, they redoubled their efforts at the shelter, working to create a safe and secure environment for the dogs in their care. They installed new security systems and cameras, and they implemented strict protocols for adoption and fostering to ensure that no dog fell into the wrong hands. But even as they worked to protect the dogs, they knew that they had to do more. They had to strike at the heart of the new dogfighting ring, to bring its leaders to justice and dismantle its operations once and for all. And so they launched a new investigation, this time with the help of Sarah and some of the other volunteers who had proven themselves to be invaluable allies in the fight against animal abuse. They worked tirelessly to gather evidence and build a case against the new ring, often putting themselves in harm's way to get the information they needed. It was a long and difficult process, filled with setbacks and challenges at every turn. But the firefighters refused to give up, driven by their unwavering commitment to justice and their deep love for the dogs they had sworn to protect. And in the end, their hard work paid off. They were able to bring the leaders of the new ring to trial, presenting a mountain of evidence that left no doubt as to their guilt. And when the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted in cheers and tears of joy once again, as the firefighters and their allies celebrated another hard-fought victory in the battle against animal abuse. But even as they savored their triumph, the firefighters knew that their work was far from over. They had learned the hard way that cruelty and corruption could take many forms, and that they would always have to be vigilant in the face of those who would seek to harm the innocent. And so they redoubled their efforts once more, pouring their hearts and souls into the shelter and the dogs who needed them most. They knew that they had been given a precious gift, a chance to make a real difference in the world, and they were determined to make the most of it, one small act of kindness at a time. As the years passed, the firefighters of Millfield and their shelter became a beacon of hope and compassion for the entire community. They had faced down some of the darkest forces of cruelty and corruption, and they had emerged stronger and more determined than ever to make a difference in the world. Under their care, countless dogs had found healing and happiness, their scars fading and their spirits soaring as they learned to trust and love again. And with each success story, the firefighters felt a renewed sense of purpose and pride, knowing that they had played a part in something truly extraordinary. But even as they celebrated their triumphs, they knew that there was still so much work to be done. There were always more dogs in need of their help, more battles to be fought against those who would seek to harm the innocent. And so they continued to pour their hearts and souls into their work, driven by a deep and abiding love for the creatures they had sworn to protect. They expanded their shelter, taking in more dogs and recruiting more volunteers to help with their care and rehabilitation. They also began to reach out to other communities, sharing their knowledge and expertise with those who were facing similar challenges in the fight against animal abuse. They hosted workshops and training sessions, and they worked with lawmakers and advocacy groups to push for stronger protections and harsher penalties for those who harmed animals. Through it all, the firefighters leaned on each other for strength and support, their bond forged in the crucible of their shared struggles and triumphs. They had become more than just colleagues or friends. They were a family, united by a common purpose and a deep and abiding love. And at the center of that family was Ember, the brave and resilient German shepherd who had started it all. She had come so far from the broken and beaten creature she had once been, and her spirit had become a guiding light for all those who knew her. Ember's story had become a symbol of hope and redemption, a testament to the power of love and compassion to heal even the deepest wounds. And as the firefighters looked to the future, they knew that her legacy would endure long after they were gone, inspiring generations to come to fight for what was right and to never give up on the promise of a better world. As the firefighters of Millfield continued their work at the shelter, they began to notice a new and unexpected development. Many of the dogs who had been rescued from the dogfighting rings were showing signs of extraordinary resilience and strength, their spirits unbroken despite the trauma they had endured. Some of these dogs had even begun to show an aptitude for service work, their keen intelligence and unwavering loyalty making them ideal candidates for jobs in law enforcement, search and rescue, and therapy. The firefighters knew that they had a unique opportunity to help these dogs reach their full potential, and so they began to work with professional trainers and handlers to develop specialized programs tailored to each dog's individual strengths and needs. It was a challenging and rewarding process, watching as the dogs learned new skills and gained confidence with each passing day. And as they progressed through their training, the firefighters couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and amazement at the incredible creatures they had helped to save. Among the most promising of these dogs was a young pit bull named Luna, who had been rescued from a particularly brutal dogfighting ring. Despite the scars that marred her body and the fear that haunted her eyes, Luna had shown an extraordinary capacity for love and forgiveness, her tail always wagging and her spirit always shining through. Under the guidance of her trainers, Luna began to flourish, her natural intelligence and keen sense of smell making her an ideal candidate for search and rescue work. She learned to track scents over long distances, to navigate difficult terrain, and to alert her handlers to the presence of survivors in the wake of disasters. And when the time came for Luna to put her skills to the test, she did not disappoint. In the aftermath of a devastating earthquake that struck a nearby town, Luna and her handler were called in to assist with the search and rescue efforts. For days, they worked tirelessly, combing through the rubble and debris in search of survivors. And when they finally found a young child trapped beneath a collapsed building, it was Luna who And when they finally found a young child trapped beneath a collapsed building, it was Luna who alerted them to her presence, barking furiously until the rescuers were able to dig through the rubble and pull the girl to safety. In that moment, as the child clung to Luna's neck and wept with relief and gratitude, the firefighters knew that they had witnessed something truly extraordinary. They had seen firsthand the incredible power of second chances, the way that love and compassion could transform even the most broken and traumatized creatures into heroes and beacons of hope. And as they looked around at the other dogs in their care, each one with their own unique story and their own incredible potential, they knew that their work was far from over. They had a responsibility to help these dogs heal and grow, to give them the chance to become the heroes they were always meant to be. Years later, the legacy of the Millfield firefighters and their extraordinary dogs lived on. The shelter had become a model for animal rescue and rehabilitation, a shining example of what was possible when compassion and dedication were put into action. Ember, the brave German shepherd who had started it all, had long since passed away, but her spirit lived on in the countless dogs who had been saved and transformed by the love and care of the firefighters. Her story had become a legend, a testament to the enduring power of hope and resilience in the face of even the darkest of circumstances. And the firefighters themselves had become heroes in their own right, their tireless work and unwavering commitment to justice and inspiration to all who knew them. They had faced down some of the most brutal and ruthless forces of cruelty and corruption, and they had emerged stronger and more determined than ever to make a difference in the world. But even as they celebrated their successes, they knew that their work was never truly done. There would always be more dogs in need of their help, more battles to be fought against those who sought to harm the innocent. And so they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that every dog they saved, every heart they touched, was a victory in the never-ending battle for compassion and justice. They knew that they had been given a precious gift, a chance to make a real difference in the world, and they were determined to make the most of it, one small act of kindness at a time. In the end, the story of the Millfield firefighters and their remarkable dogs was one of hope and redemption, a testament to the enduring power of love and compassion in the face of even the darkest of circumstances. It was a story that touched the hearts of people all over the world, inspiring them to take action in their own communities, to stand up against cruelty and injustice wherever they found it. And it was a story that would be remembered for generations to come, a shining example of what was possible when ordinary people came together to do extraordinary things. For the firefighters of Millfield, it was a story that had become a part of who they were, a defining moment in their lives that had shaped them in ways they could never have imagined. They had set out to save a single dog, to bring a measure of justice to a world that often seemed so cruel and unfair. But in the end, they had done so much more than that. They had built a community of kindness and compassion, a network of hope and healing that stretched far beyond the borders of their small town. They had touched countless lives, both human and canine, and they had made a difference in the world that would endure long after they were gone. And as they looked to the future, they knew that their work was far from over. There would always be more challenges to face, more battles to be fought in the name of justice and compassion. But they also knew that they would never have to face those challenges alone. They had each other, and they had the love and support of a community that had been forever changed by their example. And so they pressed on, secure in the knowledge that they had the strength and the courage to face whatever lay ahead, to keep fighting for the voiceless and the vulnerable, one small act of kindness at a time. For they were the firefighters of Millfield, and they would never stop believing in the power of hope and the promise of a better world. And in the end, that was all that mattered.